I just wanted to take 1 minute to say a word of thanks to all our sponsors. We've been here 30 years. Some of our sponsors, I think, have probably been with us for all 30 years. We're very grateful to all of you for your support and staying with us all this time. We couldn't do these events without you, so thank you. So we're going to talk about Europe with Anne Applebaum, who's a journalist, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, former colleague, many years ago at The Economist, and Enrico Letta, former Prime Minister of Italy, author of the famous Letta Report, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and a great friend of this conference over the years. So thank you both for joining us today. And perhaps I'll start with you, because we've been hearing about democracy. You've literally written a book on democracy. Your reflections, to start with, on where things stand in Europe with the challenge of keeping democracy going in the face of formidable challenges.
So thank you. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be back in Greece. Every time I'm here, I hear more statistics about how well Greece is doing, and that's it's really wonderful. I've spent a lot of time trying to think of what word we can use to describe this current moment. You know, is it a turning point? Is it a paradigm shift? Is it transformative? What is the expression that we use to talk about our current era? And what I finally landed upon was a book title. So I've stolen this idea. And it's a book called The Hour of the Predator. And I do believe that we're living now in the age of the predator. We're living at a time when the United States of America no longer sees the world as a space for integration, mutual cooperation, everybody wins kinds of politics, and looks much more at the world as a zero-sum game. Where can we win? What can we take? What advantage can we have? We are, in Europe, also living next door to a Russian regime which has a truly hybrid plan to undermine governments, to use both kinetic, real warfare, as well as sabotage, acts of sabotage in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in the UK, in Germany, to undermine governments and political stability around the region, as well as the threats of military attack to destabilize the NATO as well as Ukraine. And also in a time when the Chinese increasingly see themselves, if not military opponents of Europe, but as a power who want to have control of all of modern technology, who want to be self-sustaining, and who also increasingly don't see Europe as a partner or a place of mutual investment, but again, as a source of, as a place where they can sell their stuff and not necessarily need to buy anything else. And paradoxically, what we have here at the moment is three great powers who are challenging Europe's ability to be sovereign. And this word sovereignty is really important and interesting at the moment, because it's a word often used by the far right, who talk about the threats to sovereignty in Italy or in France, or in Poland or here. Whereas really, and they speak of the threat to sovereignty as if the threat were coming from the European Union, or from NATO, or from these multilateral European alliances. In fact, we're at a moment when exactly the opposite is the case. In other words, Europe is only going to be able to maintain its sovereignty. European democracies will only be able to stay democratic if they build up their ability to work together and give Europe a voice in the world. I'm sure we'll talk about this more on the panel, so I won't go into more details, but certainly in at least three areas, Europe now needs to think about how to become sovereign. One of them is in energy. Europe can be neither dependent on Russian gas nor American LNG, because both can be used as tools of political blackmail to change and alter governments here. And that puts a push on the green transition, which we all thought of as some nice thing that we needed to do to save the planet. It now turns out that it's also something that has to be done if Europe is going to maintain its independence. Secondly, technology. Again, it's not just about wouldn't it be great if Europe had some of its own tech companies. It's a question of who is going to control political conversation. Here in Greece, in Poland, in Germany, in the UK, will it be the algorithms written in California and in Shanghai? Or will it be European companies writing the rules, setting the rules of conversation and the rules of information according to European values and in ways that benefit European countries and strengthen European democracy? And we've just heard from Cyprus the importance of using tools of modern debate and conversation to strengthen democracy and not only to allow them to be undermined. We are right now at a moment when both American and Russian influence campaigns inside Europe are seeking to push the cause of far right and sometimes, in the case of Russia, far left parties. The only answer to this is for Europe to have its own way of communicating and distributing information according to rules that are more fair and, again, as I said, not determined from the outside. And finally, the most obvious, of course, is defense technology, which has been, I think, transformed to a degree that most Europeans still don't understand. I was last in Ukraine a month ago. I visited both a unit who were operating drone interceptors in the field, and I was in a couple of factories. This is now a cutting-edge technology. It's changing almost every month. Every European country that wants to be safe, that wants to understand how to protect its citizens in the future, should be involved in investing in Ukraine. Again, not just because it's nice to help Ukraine, but because that's really where the technological cutting edge is. It's not about buying big pieces of American equipment anymore. It's about modernizing European defense technology to keep Europe sovereign and to keep, and to keep Europe safe. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to continue.
Okay. Well, fascinating. I want to, before turning to Enrico, I'd like to unpack a couple of things there because there's a lot in that. First thing, it's striking in the way that you frame it as Europe under threat from these three hyperpowers, if we may call them that. I don't think Russia is a hyperpower, perhaps, but certainly China, America, but also the formidable presence of Russia. And you put America as a kind of, you did it as a kind of equal challenge for Europe. And I'm curious to know whether that is really the case. Is America really as much of a challenge to Europe as China, as Russia? And do you think that this is something that is specific to current administration in America, or is it something that Europe is just going to have to get used to for the long term?
So it's very important to listen to what the Trump administration says, to read the documents that they put out, to read their national security strategy, to listen not just to the president, but to people around him. It's very tempting to frame this administration as a strange moment in history with a president who's very whimsical and, intervenes in a soccer match one day and, in a foreign election the next without much strategy. But actually there is a group of people around him, and they are now people who have influence in politics and influence in the right-wing media sphere, who do now see Europe and European liberal democracy as a kind of enemy. And of course they see it as an enemy because they interpret European liberal democracies as being somehow the equivalent of the Democrats in the United States. And they say it. You can read you can read them saying it. You can hear them talking about it. You can hear them talking about European civilizational collapse. You can hear them talking about Europe letting in too many migrants, having changed its civilizational orientation. And so they understand that this Europe needs to be changed. And in the President's national security strategy, it was very clear that the US no longer sees itself as the leader of a democratic camp promoting democracy around the world, and we've heard that also from the president. But instead it sees itself with really there's only one part of the world where they're interested in political change, and that's in Europe. And so I think, again, U.S. is a very big country. Foreign policy is produced by many different institutions, by Congress, by the Democratic Party, as well as by the administration. But it's very important to listen to what they're saying and to take it seriously, because even after this president is gone and is replaced by somebody else, maybe even a Democrat, then this set of ideas is also going to remain inside the body politic, and it will have a set of adherents in Congress and elsewhere. And it's really important to understand that the speed with which the US made this shift is a kind of, which really has happened over the last decade, it should be taken as a warning that nothing is guaranteed, that of course there are long-standing ties to the United States and friendships and actually deep military partnerships. If you asked an American general, intelligence partnerships, if you asked an American general right now, who are your closest allies, he would say Europeans as well as the South Koreans and the Japanese. But all of those things are still there, but the ideological commitment to them, both at the top and in the country more broadly, is badly frayed. And so it's very important for Europe going forward to not be beholden or nostalgic for the past. I think, as Mark Carney said, hope is not a strategy. Hoping that we will go back to where we were isn't really an option for Europe.
So one more question, and then I'll turn to Enrico. But you said that in the military sphere that Europe hadn't yet really grasped how fast things are changing on the battlefield and on the technological level. And I think you're saying, in a way, that Europe isn't really grasping the fundamental nature of this shift and the likely durability of this shift. Is that a fair assessment? Do you think we're still running behind? And you straddle, interestingly, the worlds of Europe and America. Do you think that we're still playing catch up in Europe in terms of getting our minds around quite how much the world has changed?
I think there are different, there are different interests. There depends who you speak to. There's some people who clearly understand the nature of the change and others don't. But look, Ukraine doesn't have a navy. It has no navy to speak of. And yet Ukraine chased the Russian Navy out of the western part of the Black Sea and might well continue. Ukraine doesn't really have an air force. It has a very small one. And yet Ukraine is now able to attack Russian refineries very, very deep inside Russia. So eliminating the idea that Russia has, as President Zelensky said yesterday, that Russia even has a kind of safe strategic rear. I mean, unfortunately, if it's true of Russia, it's true of everybody. And so everybody's navy now needs to be a navy that takes into consideration the possibility that a very small $100,000 sea drone can take out a submarine, because that's happened in the Black Sea. And everybody needs to take into consideration the idea that their factories or their production lines, deep in the countryside, far away from the front line, aren't necessarily safe if there ever came to a shooting war. And as I said, there have been a number of really important European investments already in the Ukrainian drone industry, which is largely supported by European money. And this is also, there's been already in the last year an important transformation. I remember even a year ago people saying to me, but is it possible that Europe could support Ukraine? We don't have the resources. We can't do it without the United States. But it turned out that it was possible. And it just took a different way of thinking about what that support looked like. It wasn't a question of giving the Ukrainians tanks. It was a question of supporting the drone industry on the ground, doing joint ventures, doing deals, learning from this kind of constantly updated technological revolution that's happening there. So, there will still be a need for F-35s. There will still be a need for planes, but how they're going to be used is going to change a lot.
Okay. Enrico, listening to this, you've been focused on another sort of European challenge, which is particularly the economic competitiveness. Also a kind of wake-up call to Europe of the depth of the reforms that it needs to put into a practice. 2 years on, how do things stand?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with Anne. I recommend reading Autocracy. INC is one of the must read to my students in Madrid, because today is really a reference. I have to say I see a direct link, Daniel, between what Anne said, but also on the previous speeches, the great speech made from His Excellency the President of the Republic of Greece, that I liked very much, on the point on the strength of our democracy is how to agree on how to disagree. That is, for me, a fantastic definition. Because the true strength of the European democracy is that we are based on reconciliations. We were all enemies. We were all enemies. I ask you to give, a thought to all the names of the streets in our cities. Half of these names, for what I know, I used to live in France, in Spain, in Italy, all these names, or large part of these names, are people that are for us, each country, heroes, but they are heroes because they killed the neighboring countries' people, or they were killed by the neighboring countries' people. And today these borders are cooperation borders, no more bloody borders. Our democracy is based on reconciliations. And our democracy is based on the fact that we are a union of minorities. And this is the point linked to competitiveness. Because there's a way to be competitive in Europe that is different from the rest of the world. Because of the history we have, and also because of the dimension of our countries. We are all small countries in Europe, all small countries. The main problem is that someone in Europe is not aware he is small, but we are all small countries. And we are all small countries, and today the main point is how to combine competitiveness and sovereignty. Because we can be competitive without being sovereign. There are plenty of countries in the world that are small, they are competitive, but they are rule takers. They are not sovereign. With Europeans, we want to be in full sovereignty. And if we want to be in full sovereignty, we have to integrate, because we have to scale. It's the only way. So if I have to summarize in a nutshell, in a message, the true mission today for the European institutions in the implementation of the two reports is just one very simple message. With the raise of dimensions of China, India, the American competitiveness, the world has totally changed in terms of dimensions. I give you just one image that can be maybe a way for you to smile. My own country, Italy, when the single market was created 35 years ago, was economically as big as China and India together. Today we are smiling to this perspective. China, India together, more than 3 billion people, the same size of Italy economically? Yes, it was the same size of Italy. Today they are 20 times. So the dimension has changed everything. And the key point is that if we want a future that is a European future, we have to integrate and we have to raise scale. Otherwise, the future is to have a debate that I see in the different European countries, that is a debate between two polarities, who want to be more close to the Americans and who want to be more close to the Chinese. Being an American colony or being a Chinese colony. We have to be Europeans. Today, I am more hopeful than last year for a very simple reason, because after what happened this year, And first of all, the big acceleration happened after January-February Greenland crisis.
Yep.
That was, in my view, the turning point of everything. The European leaders understood that they have to integrate. There's no alternative. And so they decided, during the Cyprus presidency, I congratulate the president of Cyprus for that, the date, the most important date is April 24, because they agreed, European Parliament, tomorrow you will have Roberta Metsola here, you can ask her, the European Council and the European Commission decided to have these 42 measures. The plan is One Europe, One Market, is the plan to have in the next 18 months. Each measure has a Q, Q3 26, Q2 27 for the implementation. All these measures are trying to integrate energy, financial markets, connectivity, introducing the so-called 28 regime, so a unique corporate law system for the entire European business, able to help European business not to have a complicated environment, but to have a simplification. The fifth, freedom on innovation. All these 42 measures are there. Some of them have been already presented, and they started already their track in the legislative process. Now it's time to go. And I'm very pleased to be here, also because Greece is playing a fundamental role. I want to congratulate Greece for many reasons. But the fact that today the Eurogroup is under the leadership of a Greek Minister of Finance, Mr. Pierakakis, is something that is enormous for the way in which Europe worked in the last years. And I'm sure that this leadership can help the integration of all these topics. And it is fundamental. Daniel, I hope, and Nectaria, I hope next year, when we will meet here again in July, we will have not 42 measures to go, but just 10 to go, because the other 32 will be already approved.
Wonderful. Well, you mentioned two reports. Of course, the other report is the Draghi report, your sort of twin roadmaps for a more competitive Europe. I guess the challenge to this picture, this optimistic picture that you present of Europe, is that it still feels slow. I know for Europe it may not be slow. In European terms, this is deadlines and progress. But what Anne has described is a world that is moving at sort of breakneck speed, at warp speed, technologically and geopolitically. And yet Europe has to follow its processes. And so I come back to the question of, 2 years ago, your urgent report, your urgent urging for Europe, how many measures have actually happened from that report?
But I answer in the easiest way for me, that is the fact that today we are here, and for instance, on trade, we had the last 5 months in which the European Union delivered more than in the last 10 years. I just mentioned 5 big choices that are signed and into force: India, Indonesia, Australia, Mexico, and first of all, Mercosur. 5 giants around the world, 2.5 billion in terms of population. We, in the last 5 months, this is why I mentioned Greenland. Greenland was an accelerator that is incredible. I don't know if the American people or the American experts are really aware of the consequences of Greenland. Because after Greenland, we had this acceleration also on these 5 topics. And this is the demonstration that the acceleration is there. You're right, Daniel. Last year, the European Union and the European Union leaders were a little bit, shy. I think because they started thinking that they knew how to deal with Trump, because they had Trump 1. And they thought Trump 1 was easy. Vocal, jokes, but no bad consequences. In reality, Trump 2 is totally different. They understood, after 1 year of painful decisions, now I see the acceleration. Of course, the acceleration doesn't mean that we are in a new world. but there's an opportunity. But I would like to underline one point, because I don't want to, how we say, be perceived as naive, optimistic. I see this momentum, I see this opportunity, but I also see the fact that it is the last chance. I don't see another opportunity like the one we are having today. Today we have this opportunity. We have the plans, we have the awareness, and we have the determination of the different countries. And we have also the possibility to do it in the next 18 months. We have the pressure from abroad. I have to say the pressure from abroad is really great. I've never seen in these days of football all European supporters supporting the same European teams. We were all Belgium. We were all for Lukaku, Decatur. Also,
well, there were specific reasons for that, in fairness.
Also the Dutch, I think, France, they were for the Belgian. Also the Italians, we were all for the Belgian. And I'm sure that the French will be supported by all the Italians too in another match. So it's something incredible that is happening. I'm not joking. These topics are important as politics is important. There's a sense of unity in Europe that was not there before. Of course, this sense of unity is because of the pressure from abroad, from Russia, daily strikes, daily killing people, innocent people in Ukraine, and it's unbelievable what is happening there. And of course, the pressure, the competitive pressure from China, with some conundrum that are complicated for us, because I don't want to say that everything is easy. We want to continue in the transition, in the green transition, accompanying the business in this transition, but we know very well that today, if we want to continue for renewables, for instance, we have to use Chinese tools. But if we want to protect our industry, we have to protect our industry from the Chinese tools. So that is a conundrum, and we have to overcome this conundrum in a very intelligent, creative way, because we have to continue on the transition. At the same time, we have to help our industry and avoiding to be overwhelmed by Chinese tools. So it's great to be in this kind of decisions to take, but I think and I feel that today this awareness is there, and it is a totally different awareness.
Anne, you wanted to come in on this.
I wanted to emphasize again this point about integration and add another difficulty, which is that again, a part of the US administration, a part of the movement that has been created around Donald Trump is very specifically against EU integration and really specifically against the EU itself. Some of this is ideological, as I said, civilizational and so on, but some of it is very specific. It's because the EU is really the only institution on the planet that is able to regulate US tech companies. Nobody else can do it. The US itself is unable to do it. Nobody else can. And simultaneously, perhaps less important, but nevertheless they're there, the Russians are also very much against EU integration, because for them, when Russia speaks to Germany or when Russia speaks to France, they're at least an equal or a partner. When they speak to Slovenia, they're much larger. When they speak to the European Union, they're dealing with a real power. They have less influence. They have less ability to, to control the conversation. And so right now you have a real challenge to the European Union itself, coming both from, again, a part of the United States and from the Russians. And that's also a, and because both the US and Russia have political parties and movements and people and companies inside really almost every European country with whom they are aligned and sometimes with whom they fund, this is another obstacle to integration that we don't like to talk about, but we will also see it in coming months and years.
Can I ask about this shape of Europe? You've both been talking about the European Union. Of course, I come from a country which is sadly no longer in the European Union, but also there are other countries that want to join the European, big countries like Ukraine that want to join the European Union, and it's not clear what the path will be, and many other not so big countries that are in the queue. Do you think that the future shape of Europe, because of these external threats, will end up being somewhat more flexible so that countries like Britain, like Ukraine, can have closer integration without necessarily being full members? Perhaps, Enrico, you could take that one first.
I think yes, for the very simple reason that we have to find a way to have a relationship with the UK, and this relationship is a win-win relationship. I don't think this relationship can be resolved just in a rejoin. It's a complicated issue. So we have to shape a new relationship between the European Union and the UK. I'm dealing with this topic in the last months. I have the feeling that it's not a very sexy topic. People are exhausted in the UK and in Brussels on the post-Brexit discussion. So it's not easy for this reason, but it will be. On Ukraine, I think the main topic is the future will be Ukraine joining. I don't think that we can consider that Ukraine has to be out. The topic is when and which is the path. I saw a difference in the last months. Today, the fact that Ukraine has a military that is technologically very advanced has, I would say, made possible for some countries to change their mind on the way to have Ukraine on board or not. But the most important now is to be fast, in my view, on the integration of the Western Balkans. They are ready to be in. There's no reason not to have the Western Balkans within the European Union. And in my view, the other main message is the fact that one country like Iceland, end of August, will run a referendum to decide whether to be in the European Union. And if Iceland is in, I'm sure that Norway will start discussing. Traveling around Europe also to discuss about the report and the implementation of the report, I visited many times in the last months Sweden and Denmark. You know that Sweden and Denmark are countries out of the euro. I know that they are discussing seriously whether joining the euro is a perspective today or not. So in a nutshell, in my view, the sense of a healthy continent is also how many countries want to join the European Union. And today, we have many countries queuing to joining the European Union. And for me, it's something that is the sense of positive. We have to be intelligent, generous, and having, we say, the perspective on that. I have to say that the enlargement of 2004 was a great success. We have to say it, because I remember all the discussions at that time, all the backlashes at that time. It was a great success. One of the greatest success of the European Union was the enlargement process. Today we are stronger and we are more competitive also because of the enlargement, and we have to consider that it's a mission. Of course, the enlargement is changing Europe, it's reshaping Europe, but as the entire world is changing. So we have to adapt, and we have to adapt the future of Europe to these new dimensions. I think it's a great moment also because of that. Sorry to say, the 28th chair is an empty chair, but is full of people queuing to be part of this challenge. I don't see the same queue for becoming the 51st state of the US.
So, for Anne, I wonder whether you see things the same way, or whether that Europe has to be part of the adaptability, might be in the future a more flexible way of some sort of adhesion that is not full adhesion.
So, although I don't disagree with anything you just said, I also hope that we don't become too trapped by these institutions and who is a member and who is not when we think about moving forward. For example, in the area of defense, it's much more important to think about what is the project, what do we want to achieve, and who are the countries who are willing to work together to achieve it. And those countries will include the UK, Norway, maybe Canada, maybe South Korea. If we're thinking about how to build.
And Ukraine.
And Ukraine, of course. I mean, Ukraine goes without saying. When we think about, for example, go project by project, how to fight against kleptocracy, or how to reform the way we use the internet. There will be the need for Europe to build coalitions with countries who aren't technically part of the European Union, but who think the same way and have the same concerns. I was in Brazil a few months ago, where their concerns about how the algorithms work on their internet are the same as here, and why shouldn't there be a dialogue and why shouldn't there be a joint project in which the EU is working with those countries. There are a number already of defense projects. There's a kind of Scandinavian, British, Northern European, Baltic, Polish, German group that already thinks together and plans together because they have similar concerns around the Black Sea. There's already a coalition of the willing built around Ukraine that includes some countries that are in and out of the EU. And it seems to me that that's the way to think going forward. Not who's in this club or who's in that club, but what is the thing that we want to achieve, and who are the countries who are willing to help us achieve it? And I do very much hope that Europe remains flexible in that sense.
So we've had an emphasis on the external threats that Europe has faced that have, in a sense, galvanized progress, is galvanizing progress in Europe. What we haven't talked is a bit of the elephant in the room, or elephant not quite in the room, which is the internal dynamics of Europe in some European countries. Today we have the news that Marine Le Pen is saying she will be a candidate for the next French election. She is in, quite a chance that she might win. Enrico, you've lived in Paris, you say. How would you view this prospect? First of all, do you think it could seriously happen, and what difference would it make to the future of Europe?
We have next year many elections. The elections here in Greece, the election in my country, Italy, the elections in Spain, and of course the elections in France.
Poland. The
elections in Poland then. So I mentioned France as different from the rest. Of course, the French, they feel to be different from the rest. It's by definition. But it is different for a very technical reason. The French constitutional system is different from all the other constitutional systems. And today, the European Council is playing a fundamental role in the European institutional equilibrium. And the European Council is a place where the 27 are together. They are, I would say, the European sovereignty together. They represent their country and they represent the European Union. And of course, the French president within this 27 leaders meeting is the one with a particular status. And the particular status is, of course, the defense, security, atomic, UN Security Council role. And France is a system where the system of checks and balances that we have in all the other countries is a little bit different. So the president, once elected for 5 years, has big powers, absolutely different from what happens in Italy, in Greece, in Poland, or in Spain. So I have no doubts that in the other countries, there will be a continuity on the relationship with Europe. I'm afraid that in France, the result of the election can be really a game changer at the European level. So, of course, the French people will decide, but the French situation is a particular one on that. What I would like to say is also one point on the rest, on the other 26, that at the end of the day, Europe is more important than populistic voices and temptations. Because I saw many populistic leaders being very vocal against Europe while in the opposition. While in government, you give a look to the depth of your country and you become immediately pro-European.
So you have an example close to home,
yes,
of course.
So I see that, and I say that because I don't want to always say, underline too much the potential problems of Europe in these terms. Because at the end of the day, we had in this period the European Union more united on these topics. What is important, I would like to say that in the last seconds, Daniel, if I may, there's one point that is fundamental. All these discussions, there's one point that is more important than the others, is the strength of the European financial integration system. Because today we have the euro, but we don't have a financial European market. We have 27 financial markets. It has consequences because the European financial strength, with all the consequences towards tech investments, and I give you just two numbers, 17%, 25%. The GDP of Europe, 17%, the GDP of the US, 25%. When it comes to finance, because of our fragmentation of the markets, 17 becomes 12%. We are 12% as Europeans of the world market cap. The 25% of the Americans, because of the integrity of their, hello Kyriakos, of the integrity of their market, the 25% becomes 60, and 17 and 25 on real GDP is the same championship. Same championship. 12, 60 is not the same championship. That means that their strength in terms of investments on tech, on many other investments, is a scale and magnitude that is not our capacity. So we have to work on this. We have to integrate the financial markets. The Savings and Investments Union that is today in the agenda of the Eurogroup under the leadership of Kyriakos is absolutely one of the most challenging and important decisions for the future of the European Union. If we are able on this topic to be successful, then there's a possibility for Europe to regain ground and to be at the same level of the US and China, and not a rule taker, but to challenge to be a rule setter in the future too.
Thank you, and I give you a chance to comment on the Le Pen matter, and also perhaps Enrico's given a very interesting concluding thought. Perhaps you might have one as well.
So any European leader who comes to power from left, from the right, from the center, will immediately, it will take a very short period of time, if they've never held office before, to understand what I said at the beginning, which is that if their country wants to remain sovereign, if they want to maintain their democracy, if they want to have, again, an information space, a tech industry, a defense industry that serves them and their people and not somebody else somewhere else, then they will very quickly come to the conclusion that they need to have a very strong European Union. And Prime Minister Meloni made exactly this transition. You know, I can't make any predictions about France, but whether you had, from whichever part of the political spectrum the next president comes from, I imagine he or she will wind up having to make that too. I mean, if you look out at the world from any European capital, you know, what you see is you're surrounded by friends, and then beyond that, it's uncertain. And if you want to, again, if you want to maintain the integrity of your societies, if you want to maintain your sovereignty, then you will work together with other Europeans to do so.
Thank you very much. I think that is a superb way to get our conversation going. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Enrico, for the